Great. Welcome, everyone. We're going to be continuing the series focusing on ADAPT in this year's Open Ed Week. And 2 days ago, we went over how to build a course and how to import existing courses and some of the properties associated with those courses. What we're going to be doing right now is how to put assignments into those courses. It will also involve how to import existing assignments, but that's not too dissimilar from importing existing courses. And I hope to be able to go into some level of detail on how to find questions in order to put into the assignments. And that's going to be a success for the next 50 to 60 minutes. Uh, what I won't be talking about will be how to create questions. And that depends upon which technology you want to do, and it invariably takes a bit more time than what we have available in this session. Although we do have some videos of that already on our YouTube channel, and we provide help in a wide variety of ways, including the office hours I had mentioned previously, and other videos that or the presentations that we do outside of our LibreFest meetings, Oktoberfest, and then it's Open Ed Week. So anyways, everyone should have an Adapt account. If you don't, let me know. And the point of what we want to be able to do is to work within the system that we have. So we have courses, courses have assignments, assignments have questions. So that's a traditional way in which we present these things. A less traditional way is courses, assignments, and then trees that are, instead of a single question, you have a structured aspect of things. And I mentioned that a couple days ago on the Monday presentation, the overview of things. And I'll be going into more detail about that tomorrow afternoon at the same time that we have here. And such in those cases there, I sometimes refer to the assignments as orchards instead of individual assignments because they hold the trees. But nonetheless, let's get into the going. So this is the course that we were working on, Introduction to Adapt. Now, and I signed into Adapt already, and I hope everyone here has signed in order to be able to do that. And I have no assignments in this course, which is not surprising because we didn't get that far. We just got to being able to make the course. So I want to be able to build assignments off here. So the easiest way in order to populate assignments into the course is to be able to grab someone else's assignment. And again, when we talk about an assignment, we're talking about a collection of questions typically involved in it, although we could just bring in an empty assignment over there, which is just basically bringing in some meta tags and characterization of assignments. Rarely is that necessary or that people do it, but you could theoretically do that. So anyways, let's talk about grabbing someone else's assignment. So if I go into import assignment, I basically can choose a collection. This is an area where it's coming from, either all public courses, that's what we looked at before, only those courses that we, as a development team, LibreTexts development team, will curate, uh, and then only my courses. So I may only want to be able to parse through and know I want this assignment from one other course that I did before. I want to bring it over and not have to parse through all the other courses that exist off of here. So in this case here, I'm going to grab all public courses and I'm going to choose a public course here. Which takes a moment to load up. We will have a better filtering system here, so you don't have to cut through close to 1,000 different courses. And these are only the public courses. As you may remember a couple of days ago, you can create courses that are both public and private. Private means only you and your students know about the course. Uh, you can do the same thing with questions if you decide to do so, even though we haven't talked about that. But that doesn't jive with the sharing is caring model underlying OER. So I strongly encourage people to make things public so that other people can benefit from what you've done. So it can come in here and say, well, I want to bring in a course from Arabic. Let me phrase it. I want to bring in an assignment. It looks like this course has only one assignment. Otherwise, I'd have a whole list right here. I can click on it, and as I mentioned before, I have the ability to bring in the properties of the assignment uh, and the questions, or just the properties. The 99% of the time, you care about the questions that are part of the assignment, not just the nature of the assignment itself. There are some exceptions off of that. And I just press the import assignment, and it brings it in. Easy peasy. Just like when we were bringing in an existing course, it comes in with a red hue, and this is now my assessment infrastructure of my course, quote unquote. What does that mean to you guys?
Sorry, I was playing and doing things. Ask your question again, please.
This has a red hue. Why does it have a red hue?
Unpublished.
Which means what?
Unpublished, like not available to students.
Not available to students. The students can't see it.
Yeah.
If the course were for public, that means other faculty can see it and bring it in just like what we did before. But the key point is that no one who's a member of uh, the course, at least no student as a member of the course, will be able to see this assignment. And just like with the other one, we can flip it on manually by clicking that button and it turns green, which means it's all ready to go or it's published off that. We do have an option called auto. I believe I mentioned this a couple days ago as the opportunity in order to release automatically certain aspects of this assignment so I don't have to manually do that. For example, making it so that it automatically becomes published, which I have the option for doing. I don't have it activated on this course, so no matter what, I can't click on it, but I can always manually do so. And I can turn on auto in the course properties in order to be able to say, yes, 5 days before the start, sorry, 5 days before uh, it's available for students in order to submit, I will make it so students will know that assignment exists. You know, because I don't want to have a situation where an assignment just pops up out of nowhere and students aren't prepared in order to do so. But I don't want to have many assignments that overwhelm the students when they actually come in. Okay, so a few things associated with the this assignment. We have a title. If I click on this thing, it will go into the assignments. And that means I'll see the questions that are on here. And this has two questions connected to it. So I grabbed a relatively stunted assignment, largely because that was probably a course that's still under development. I'm going to skip back here. And I already talked to the release statement. Again, if you have a little question mark here, you can click on it and it will give you a little, what's called a tooltip, little mini instructions on the details associated with that. This is a group, so I have a classification that this counts as homework, but it might be any classification I want. That's important because I can use, if I want, adapt in order to be able to calculate the scores of students. And I need no rubric, 10% for homework, 30% for midterm one, 30% for midterm two, etc. And that requires identifying what that assignment is connected to. If you pass everything back to your learning management system, all that stuff is in your LMS, so you don't really need this at all. Anyways, this tells you that it's released. That's because it's been published. So really, I should probably call this published instead of released, but we're not going to change that anytime in the near future. Available on is when it's open. Due is when it's closed. And the current status right now here is closed because this due date, it came in with this automatic due date that was 4 minutes ago. So now students are unable to access that. They can't submit it. Let me phrase that. They can access the questions, they can't submit it. We have some action items. These action items are near identical to the action items that you have for courses, including properties of the assignment. You can clone the assignment, which duplicates it either with the questions or without the questions, and you can trash the assignment. But it has this new one here that's unique, which is grading. That pulls up the open grader, which is meant in order to facilitate grading for that assignment. That's especially useful for giving grades and more specifically giving scores for questions that require a human in order to grade, but it's also convenient in order to see what the nature is of the question for students that may be algorithmic, because every student has a different question and you need to have a mechanism in order to see what numbers the student had, a specific student has. And that's important if you want to be able to provide any sort of help for how their performance is, you know what their specific question is. If I click on this thing, it's not going to come up with anything because I have no submissions in order to be able to do. Okay. Before we go into it, I just want to talk about the other things that you can release. And I mentioned this a couple days ago, but it's worthwhile in order to talk about this again. This right here is just one of several things that we can release to students. And this releases the actual assignment so students can see it. If I click this main view and I go to control panel, and I also have access to the control panel at the assignment level, it will show me 3 additional things that I can release. Um, Actually, and a few additional ones that are not terribly important. One are the scores. So I can decide that I want to release the scores that students have done. If I want to hide this here, it's not released. That's useful if I have open-ended grading. I want to release the scores once I'm done with the grading. And I may be grading immediately after the assignment is due, which is a rarity. I might be grading this several days later when I get the time in order to be able to cut through this. Same thing if you have a TA for your class. Um, and this right here tells you when it's released. You can set this as in the auto release option, and that will give you the ability of saying that you want to release this at a certain time. I do that for my class for 12 hours after the due date. I do it for 12 hours instead of immediately after the due date because it gives me the flexibility in order to come in and give students opportunity in order to submit scores if they had an accident or something was going on there. So while I don't, my pedagogy that I chose, and you don't need to choose this, but I chose is that I don't accept any late grades, late submissions, but I give a little bit of slop in case I want to rescind that for a specific student. Yes, Sarah, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. I'm wondering, my dashboard is looking a little bit different, and I'm
Mhm.
wondering if it's because I have things linked to the LMS, but instead of a control panel, I have main view, and I don't have,
Can
I
you take
just
the
don't have,
screen? Let me take a quick look at it. I think it'll be easier for me to just tell you what's going on when I see it.
yeah.
Okay, so you imported a Spanish class. Um, you're in a campus that, oh, you're in Sierra, that's right. Okay. Uh, okay, yeah, if you click on the button that says main view, that's a toggle switch. Click on that, and there it
Ah,
goes off of it.
got it. Okay.
No
Yep, and
worries.
that changes it. Thank you.
Mhm. We used to have a lot of toggle switch everywhere. I'm starting to switch to radio buttons because they show you all the options. I think it's a little bit easier than having a toggle switch off here, but for now, this is fine. Okay, so I have the same option in terms of whether I want to release solutions. I can release the solutions in addition to scores. I can decide that I don't want the solutions to be released at all. It's entirely up to my pedagogy. I release the solutions at the same time I release the scores. So 12 hours afterwards, although I've had students ask for 6 hours. So they have the ability in order to do the due dates at 9 o'clock in the morning, the due times, and then they have the opportunity in order to start reviewing their performance in the afternoon of that day. But that's entirely up to you to decide how you want to go about doing that. And then I have the ability in order to release the statistics for that class. I can always manually release it. It gives me a little warning off of it if I want. Uh, or I can rely on auto if I have that thing set up here. And this is the statistics associated with the class, that performance. Tells you the standard deviation, tells you the mean, tells the students what their z-score is connected to it. That may or may not be useful. And as I mentioned a couple of days ago, and I'll mention it again, this right here is useful when you have enough students in your class that the statistics have meaning. Uh, and I think that that's right around the 50 student mark. And if you have less than 50, the statistics might actually result in more confusion for for students trying to interpret them than what you get by actually releasing that. Now, since this class, my class that I'm teaching this morning or yesterday morning is 122 students, that right there is perfectly fine. The statistics are good. They can put down there the law of central tendency or whatever the statistics, I can't remember it is, the limiting rate law. No, whatever. I just stopped talking about statistics off here. It looks pretty Gaussian-ish with some tails and they can interpret it right. Okay. We have a few additional things that most people don't deal with. If you decide that you want to show students the questions, but you don't want them to know what are the number of points per question, uh, then you can click that off of there. I did this because I was showing students, I prepared the exam beforehand, and it was during COVID, so all the exam was done online on using Adapt. And I didn't want students to know that how many questions, which questions were bigger than others at the time. Now, I don't really remember why I cared about this at that time, but I have the ability in order to hide that. So they know questions exist. They don't know the number of points per question. Student names, this I didn't talk about, which is actually quite useful. If I click this button here, graders are unable to see the name of the student that they're grading. And that right there is meant in order to remove as much bias as possible. So when I teach a 500 student class and I have 8 to 10 TAs handling these students, invariably the students that in some TAs, the TAs will have a preferential desire to grade their students better than other people's students. And by hiding this, I can make something that looks like a blind grading procedure, and I could say that it's 100% unbiased. What we've had people ask is to be able to make this so that it's the same for instructors. So instructors will never see the name of the student that they are grading until at some point they may need to, like you need to do intervention like that, and you flip a switch and say, okay, let me see your scores, or you uh, or at the end of the class and you want to submit your grades off of there. That's on our to-do list, but it's low on our to-do list. And last one, this is important when you actually embed uh, questions in courses, that you can make it so that or you embed a question into embed an assignment into like a LibreText book, which you can do, and you make it summative. You can provide a mechanism to parse through all the questions in the assignment or just that specific question. And that provides a mechanism to have better control. Say, okay, you may want to have a whole load of questions at the bottom of the book and students can cycle through, or you may just want to have one question that's out there. So anyways, that right there is in the control panel. I mentioned before the control panel is also in the assignment properties. We just provided it here because when you have a whole lot of these things, it's useful to see really quickly what you've released and what you haven't released and see if you actually need to address it in one way or the other. Okay, so I'm going to flip to main view here, and I'm going to go into the courses. So since we brought in an assignment, an existing assignment, it came in with its existing existing questions. It has 2 questions on here, and we'll start to notice a few more details than what you don't see at the course level. The first thing you'll notice is that this question here has an ID number. Every question has an ID number. It's actually every question in an assignment has two numbers. It has the question the ID number that's associated with the question, and the ID number that's associated with the assignment. Uh, and that right there, when it's combined together, represents the adapt ID number, and that tells uh, other systems everything they need to know. What question is in what assignment? Now, the one flaw with this is if you, and we haven't implemented it, and we probably can relatively easily, is to say what happens if you have the question multiple times. That is a rarity, but I can imagine some scenarios where you may want to have something like that, and we can't do that right now. So every question has to have a unique adapt ID number here. In the case that you do a search through the corpus of questions, you'll only be given this last number and not this number. And we started this number with 1, and this one right here is about halfway through our collection in terms of development, because we have somewhere in the order of 300,000 questions. This tells you the technology that this question is in. Again, I mentioned that there are 4 technologies that we have at play. We have IMathAS, that's the technology underlying MyOpenMath, or Lumen Learning's OHM system, or XYZ homework system. The latter 2 are for-profit enterprises, and MyOpenMath is not for profit. And David Lippman, who created the technology, also runs MyOpenMath, and he's great in what he's done. It's very impressive off here. So anyways, that's one of them. We have WebWork, which has comparable capabilities to IMathAS, but different coding infrastructure. We have H5P, which is a more graphical description of things. And then we have what we call native. And native is a hodgepodge of different technologies that we've built into Adapt proper that you're able to work with. For example, if you want to use QTI, question, test, interoperability, those are the questions that are typically created in learning management systems. You can embed them here and you can download from your LMS and upload to here and run it like this. This is also where we have our virtual dissection. That's a type of native. Our organic chemistry is a type of native, and a range of other things that we have are all native that's connected to here. This right here tells you how many points it is. This question is for our assignment. The number of points is obviously wired to the nature of the assignment, not the nature of the question. You can decide any question can be worth any number of points that you want. This right here tells you if there's a solution available. This has no solution. So there is no block associated with the solution. And I will pull up what a question looks like when you edit it, what's in our database in a moment. And then we have some action items. We can edit the question if we have editing rights to the question. Otherwise, we just see what the question looks like. We have the ability to clone the question. So most questions you can clone. So for example, if Neil makes a question that's on here, only Neil can edit that question because he is the owner. Now, he may have copied the question from somewhere else, and there has to be attribution if it's openly licensed in order to be able to do that. And if Neil copied it from a for-profit company, then Neil's in violation of copyright laws, and I'm going to call the police on him. And no one wants the Chicago police anywhere close to you or to be called. That's a different issue. But let's say I want to use Neil's question. Okay, so what do? Well, if I clone the question, I make a copy of it, and now I have editing rights on that, and it doesn't affect Neil's question. It doesn't affect any assignment that uses Neil's question because it's a completely new question. It still preserves the history that it came from Neil's question. It has the attributions that's connected to that question. So we're in compliance with open licensing, which is a critical component of how we operate, but it gives you editing rights off of it. Now, just because you have editing rights does not mean that you're going to be able to comprehend how the question was formulated. For example, if Neil wrote it in WebWork, the program that constitutes that question, because every autograded question is a little mini program. Now, if that question was written in WebWork, it's really written in Perl. And if you're not comfortable writing in Perl, you may not be comfortable editing that question, which makes sense. If you do it in IMathAS, it's PHP, and you may be more comfortable with PHP, you may not be. So just because you have editing rights to it doesn't necessarily mean that you've mastered it. And this is one of the reasons why in this short series that we're doing this week, we don't have a section on how to create questions because it just takes a bit more time than being able to do that. One exception is H5P. H5P is a graphical editor. It has a lot less power than IMathAS and WebWork, but you can go in and you can manipulate and make questions very similar to how you'd make them in your learning management system with some additional features that are more graphical and such like that. Native is also relatively easy to do. It's a graphical interface. You don't need to know about how to write in any language. And that, in fact, the nature of the language that it runs in doesn't matter at all. Okay, I digress. So these are two questions that are set up here. These are H5P questions. She didn't write a solution to it. I can click on the question and I can see what it would look like for the student, or actually in the same uh, mechanism that students would use to see these things. This is not how students see it, but it's similar, which basically embeds the question right here. This is a special question that involves subcomponents, or a composite question in H5P. And this is a simple drag and drop question in contrast to some of the other ones. And I got those right. Wow. Okay. In contrast to multiple choice and such. Now, at this point, I want to mention something that's oftentimes really poorly addressed. And I think I may have mentioned this earlier, but I say this all the time, and it's oftentimes ignored in the community. Now, H5P has serious accessibility issues. Now, for example, how would you do this problem if you were visually impaired? If you were a blind student, you cannot do this problem. So what do? Well, I got very lucky with this problem. So what do? Well, your campus accessibility team will come in and say, this is not accessible. You can't use it, period. Adapt is actually designed such that you can have a primary question that may not be accessible as long as you have a secondary question that remaps that question into something that is accessible. So for example, this drag and drop can be constructed into a series of multiple choice questions, 4 multiple choice questions with all 4 of them there. Technically, they have to be linked together so you lose options as you move off of that. But it works, and it works fine enough. And it can be made in an accessible manner. So if you, every time you have this question, you have a secondary question that is designed for accessibility purposes, then you're allowed to use this question for the 99.9% of the students that benefit from a more graphical interface. And that's something that we really baked into our system at an integral level. And I don't know any other platform that does that sort of alternative process there. You decide which students get the alternative question at the course properties level. I skipped over this a couple days ago, where you can basically say from the enrollment, from the roster, this student here gets this alternative because they have accommodations dictated by your student disability, et cetera. And I will emphasize that when the time comes and such. These sort of composite questions are not ideal for us to operate with because we already have a accordion or multiple questions in a row, so it's not necessary in order to do that. But many people do these sort of questions because they embed these questions into their textbook, and they don't want to have a whole, like in this case here, 8 questions all in a row. They just want you to be able to come in and just cycle through the questions as often. I understand where that comes from. I just don't think it's the ideal way in which we can build these things. So anyways, if we go to question 2 here, it's just basically a simple true-false question. And oh, actually, no, there's a whole lot of true-false questions. That's there. Again, this is H5P, one of the 4 technologies that we have to work off of here. Now, this is the instructor view of the questions. It comes up with some other stuff that's at the top here. If I want to, I can view this from basic, which means I hide everything, and I get something that's relatively straightforward. Uh, I'm going to get back to building assignments in a moment, but I want to be able to try to tie in using these questions because this is the last opportunity I have for doing so. I guess I can fold it a little bit in the conversation around learning trees. If I submit something and I do a check, I may want to reset that submission and redo it again. This is only available for us as we start tweaking things and see, okay, you choose this number, you choose that number, what's the response, and erase it from the database. Before I jump into the advanced view of things, I want to say that up here in the upper right-hand corner, you'll have a button that says Instructor View. If you click on that, it's a toggle switch, just like what Sarah had asked before, and it switches to what the student would view. In this case here, first, the question is late, right? It's already been closed. So if I submit to this thing, I know that it's late. Students don't see this because that warning makes no sense to them, but they do see this. This says that they haven't submitted anything. They haven't have a submitted date. Their score is 0, and then we even provide a z-score if we want to be able to do so. I'm unable to click the button in order to make it work and such. So I do want to mention the second thing that's the problem with H5P. So the first one I said is accessibility. In fact, of the 60 types of questions that you have access to with H5P via the studio, which you can access again with this rocket ship, only about 6 of them are really super accessible, meaning that you can construct them so they're 100% accessible. And those are the same questions that you would get in QTI and other things. Multiple choice, true, false, type in a number, and things like that. It's the real advanced dragging and dropping and graphical interface that requires a bit more finesse in order to be able to do. But, and those are the ones that are not accessible. But the second thing is H5P is not secure, meaning that if you want to use this as a homework platform, as a homework technology, you want to be careful to know that students can actually hack into it. The reason for that, and if you're unfamiliar with this term, then feel free to ignore it, is that this is client-side technology. So in other words, the evaluation process is handled on my computer, the one that I have running right now doing this, not on the server that actually implements that. And all I need to do is to inspect, and I can go into the code here. If I do a search, I can find solution, and it will tell me what the solution is. If I keep on looking in here, I'll find the solution on here because it's client side. I can also deactivate the internet, submit the answer, and then turn on the internet. And there we go. The upshot of it here is if I were a faculty member and I invested a lot of effort to build a whole lot of H5P problems, and then I discovered that students can hack into them easily, and I'm sure that there's a lot of discussions about that in the dark web and other places out there on how to hack into these things, because it's not really hacking. It's like super silly hacking. So this is really awful homework technology. And if you talk to the company that created this, they would say it's not meant for summative use, it's meant for formative use, practice, uh, and such. But nonetheless, many of us in the open community are trying to use it as homework, and we really should not. And I'll get off my soapbox right here because we spend a lot of effort in order to build adapt, in order to be secure and to be accessible. And all the efforts of relying on H5P as an alternative for it is completely junk. Okay, so at least from a homework perspective. So I went over these things. Let me switch out of student view, get back into here, talk about just the advanced view that you see for this question. And it has a handful of action items. This right here will give you the properties of the question, which is largely a few issues like here's a QR code and a link to that question if you want to distribute it. It still requires a student to sign into it. Gives me the H5P, even tells me where the H5P question is on the studio, which is publicly available for every student to see. Unless you decide to make the studio question private, which you can do. But I am not talking about studio development right now. I can decide some embed properties off of here. I can give a private description connected to it. I could even change the nature of the attribution if I feel it's important in order to add additional things to the attribution component. And I can update it. I'm going to cancel that. This is the editor. Sorry, this is the clone the question. So this gets back to the same thing. I said, if I like this question, but I want to clone it, I can clone this and then re-edit this. This doesn't work so well with H5P. H5P, you have to go to Studio in order to do that. But with the other technologies, it complements it. This gives me the editor for the question. This gives me a trash. And this is because I love you guys. This is because using Twitter, which I refuse to call X, their heart. So you can say, I like this thing. It actually adds it to your favorites. So it's a way to bookmark this question. And so if you go through and you like a question, you can just, and you see a little heart, you can click on it. And now I have this bookmarked in a section of my bookmarks. Those bookmarks can be found in the dashboard under, I think my questions will have the bookmarks off of there. So anyways, I'm going to get rid of that. I can change the number of points for that question. And then I can update the question off here. And I can decide if I want students to be able to upload work for that question, meaning a picture of work or something like that. That's useful. Less so for this sort of question, but when you do something that requires calculations, you grade the work based off of the number that they put in or some series of numbers off of that. But sometimes students ask for partial credit because they did a small mistake at one point or the other. And I write down that students, for students to be considered for partial credit, they need to submit their work, period. And then they don't come back to me and say, and retroactively create a different argument about the work that they've done. I think that's a reasonable thing in order to do. In this case here, it's not clicked. Anytime I see a number with this sort of, it's actually the clone option, but it's really a copy option. It will copy that whole ID number into my bookshelf, into my clipboard. That's important as I start adding questions to these things, which I'll talk about momentarily. Okay, so let's go back to where we're talking about and do a little bit of hands-on things. I want you guys to pull up your course, and I want you to add an existing assignment to your course. So that means click to import assignment, find something. It can be in Commons or public courses because you probably don't have any other courses in your comments and grab in something like joints, and I'm going to bring it in order to process that. Once you've done that, give me a thumbs up. So I'm actually, so I'm comfortable with you guys going through that process.
You're teasing me, stop it. He doesn't know how to talk.
Got one thumbs up. Sarah's ahead of the game. I think there was something in the chat here. Lisa, you're watching? Are you still here, Lisa? There you are. Okay.
Delmar, can you remind me, like this came in as already published or sorry, released? How do I, auto instead of manual?
There's manual, well, manually.
Unclick manual. There it is. Got it.
Okay. And keep in mind, this is only for students that are enrolled in the class. So if you don't want anyone to see the course, you need to make the course, anyone meaning other faculty, you want to set it as private.
Yes.
Which you can do here at the bottom right here, public versus private.
Yes.
This one here should probably be public or be private because no one needs to see the junk that I'm doing. So, okay, Lisa's watching. Sarah has a thumbs up. Neil, are you good?
I was a little distracted, but I think I'm good. Yeah.
Okay. So that's fine and dandy. There are a set of properties I want to talk about with the assignments in order to add things to this, but let's just talk about that from the context of a new assignment, not just the existing assignment. So instead of the import assignment option, I'm going to click the new assignment option. And the new assignment option comes up with a modal. This modal, as you may remember, looks very similar to the modal that we had when we were creating a course. A modal meaning this pop-up here. That's a technical word for it. So let's create an assignment. So I'm going to create an assignment, and I'm going to make a title of this is the best assignment in the world. Now, students will see the name of the assignment. I can decide if I want a public description for it that students will be able to see if they query it, explain why. And the private description is what, as an instructor, what I can see. Students don't see this and say, I need to work on this assignment, or any other metadata or any other meta discussion that you want to have associated with that assignment. Now comes the question, are you using this formatively or summatively? Again, as a reminder, summative means that students sign in and it keeps track of them. Formative means that the students don't have to sign in, and you can actually distribute the URL of this assignment to anybody and they can go do it. 2 days ago, I think I showed a demo example of a course. That right there is a formative question. I'm going to keep this as summative because most people are using this thing as a homework infrastructure that's keeping track of these things. The one thing is if you are doing this thing, this assignment for practice, you can set it as formative, and then it's completely uncoupled with that. I can decide what I want this to be. I'm going to say this is just homework. I can use any of these groups, or I can add new groups as necessary. I'm going to keep this thing as internal. If I say int external, that's an example of having to like attendance or some other thing that's connected to here. So many of the times these are things that you'd have, if you had this connected to the learning management system, you would actually do it in your LMS, not through Adapt, but I use Adapt as my primary grading system. So I need the infrastructure to add that in there. For example, my exams. My exams are not typically graded on Adapt anymore. Hopefully we don't have another pandemic in order to force that. So students will grade it and then they upload the scores here manually. The next one is scoring type. I have the option to decide if I want to based submit based on performance, meaning if they got it right or wrong, or even partial credit connected to it if I would code the question up properly, or completion, which means that they have submitted something and they get points, period. So you just care about them doing something in order to be able to do in order to get it, and you rely on them in order to be able to submit something good or good enough. Points. So I have the ability to designate points at each individual question level. This question has 5 points, this question has 7 points, this question has 9 points, or I can decide what the total number of points there are in the course. Sorry, total number of points there are in the assignment, and then I can vary the weight of the questions, such that the weight of everything equals the weight times the number. The weight is the number of points dictated that sums up to what I add to it. That's convenient if I have 20 different assignments and I want them all to have 100 points. But I may want to have some assignments have 9 questions and some assignments have 12 questions or something like that. So that means that the number of points per question will change depending on which assignment that you have. It makes it easier for students to have a better understanding of the big picture instead of having a whole lot of different assignments with different numbers. If you do that, then you decide the total number of points that you want, which is 100 points, for example. And if I have 10 questions there, each question is worth 10 points. If I have 9 questions, each question is worth 11.1 points. If I have if I have 11 questions, each question is worth 9.1 points. Such. Now comes assessment type. I can decide if I want the assignment to be real time. Real time means that students submit the number or submit something and they get an automatic response back. So real time assignments are assignments that have only auto-graded questions, because you can't submit an open-ended question and get an instantaneous response unless you are at your computer 24/7 and able to grade instantly. As there, or you have a TA that you have them in order to go about doing that, which would violate some union issues depending upon your campus. Certainly in California or in the UC system, it's like that. This will give students instant information about their performance. It will not give them the solutions. It's up to us to decide if we want them to have the solutions. And that's another option connected here. Delayed grading is something like conventional grading. Students submit a number, submit whatever assignment that's necessary off of there. It can be open-ended, it can be auto-graded. They don't get any response other than saying, you submitted. And then at a later date or later time, you release the scores after grading or otherwise. This right here is closer to assessments, but when you're doing formative use or practice, which is formative use, real time is the best way in order to do it, because you want them to get instant response and learn from what they are doing. Whereas delayed grading is more for proper assessment. Did they actually demonstrate proficiency in what they are doing? Learning trees are a very special type of assignment that involves learning trees. I'll be discussing that in more detail tomorrow, so let's punt on that. Clicker questions. So if you have assignments that's full of clicker questions, such that you can get feedback from your students during class, open and close, and they can actually pull up their phone in order to be able to do it. That's how they can go about doing so off of that. It fundamentally has a different mode of operation because you have to decide when it opens and when it closes. That's different from real time and delayed grading. What I mean is you have to be able to click a button on the assessment to say open the assignment so students can submit or not, and also submit notifications to students that they should be submitting if they have a phone and such. Okay, I already mentioned can submit work. So if I click yes, then students have the opportunity in order to upload a PDF or an image of their work. It doesn't grade it. It's complementary. It's metadata connected to the question, but it gives me the opportunity in order to take into account if I want to usurp the score that the adapt has given to the student. Okay. I have an option in order to allow students in order to contact the instructor if they so choose. So if you decide that you want students in order to be able to click on a button in order to request a regrade, for a specific question, they can go about doing that. Here, you can decide when you want them to be able to do that. If you don't want students to ever be able to contact you through Adapt, that's perfectly fine too, and you can deactivate it. I have it on always. It just makes life easier because then when they ask about a question, I have the direct link that goes to that question. I click on it and I go straight there, and I'm able to review them instantly instead of trying to process and read through it. And if the student doesn't give us enough information, then go back and forth, and it's just basically wasteful. Okay, if I have a hint on my question, I can decide if I want the students to see that hint. If I decide I want students to see the hint, I can decide if I want them to be penalized for seeing the hint. Depends upon what your pedagogy happens to be. So you can say something like 5% if the student decides that they need a hint in order to get them going forward. Again, that's your pedagogy and how to do it. I don't do that. I just I let students see it, but I don't give any penalty for it. But that's how I do it. If I have open-ended questions, so those are if I have delayed questions, I have the ability in order to decide how students upload their open-ended work. Now, not all open-ended questions are text-based that they can type online. Some of them might be that they need to draw something on a piece of paper or draw some sort of other document that they need to upload. They can upload it at each question individually. So they say this question needs this, upload. This question needs this, upload. If you're uploading only PDFs, we have the option that you can upload a single PDF for all the work and then decide which question goes to which page. We call that assignment process. And that makes life a lot easier when students are uploading a single PDF. That was born out of the pandemic because students were having a hard time doing individual uploads for every single question on an exam and still be able to get the exam done by a certain period of time. You have the ability of doing both. I highly recommend not doing so. I'm probably going to remove that option. It should just be one or the other. And if you choose one of these, stick with that for all the assignments. Otherwise, students get confused on how they're going to be uploading the PDF, and that causes a mess for everybody. Okay. Because we're talking about open-ended grading, we have the ability to have what's the default open-ended type. This can be usurped at every question level, whether they submit a file, rich text that's available. It's a block that pops up for them. Audio, they can submit an audio off of that. We don't have a video upload, but we do have video in our discuss it question types. And that's going to be discussed in an hour and 10 minutes for Spanish as a peer review infrastructure in order to facilitate communication between these things. That's useful for Spanish as a second language. I use it in my class in order to do group work. So I'm able to get the students in order to work in groups of 5 or 4 and then have them go through hard questions with certain prompts in order to be able to scaffold their education off of there. So it's not just basically a not for non-STEM topics that you are meant in order to facilitate communication. Okay, late policy. Oh, well, this one here is algorithmic. If your question is designed to be algorithmic, and not all questions are designed to be algorithmic. In fact, native questions and H5P questions are not algorithmic. Now, when I say algorithmic, I'm saying that every question so let me phrase that. Every student will get a different type of question in the assignment that's there. And the difference will be typically numbers, but they could be different figures or different things like that. But it's the same question, just used in different ways. Now, the solution for that then has to be designed to be algorithmic. So it does calculations in order to say what's right and wrong, and not just saying the answer is 5, because it might be different for a different student. If you click no, then every student gets the same question. If you click yes, then every student gets a variable question. Even if you have questions that are in IMathAS or WebWork, they may not be designed to be algorithmic. Now, we have a symbol in order to indicate if a question is designed to be algorithmic. You'll see a green twist option to let you know that that question is designed in that way. Our goal is to make as many of these questions algorithmic as possible because it helps to facilitate individualized work. Less of copying, pasting from other people's work, and less of just taking from other people's submitted or paperwork, what they've actually done on a piece of paper, force them to actually go through the process because their numbers are different from someone else's. So I almost always have this as yes. I have a late policy. Late policy can either be I don't accept late. I accept late, but I just mark it and I decide if I want to use that for any external reason, or I accept late with a deduction. If I accept late with a deduction, I can decide what percentage I want to do. It could be 10%. It could just be once, or I can say every certain period of time, like 24 hours. Such. What I don't have on here is a floor, meaning that it will go down to 0. But I do want to implement a floor at some point, so it'll never go below, like, say, 50% or whatever I want. So there's always an incentive for students to do homework. Okay, I can decide if I want this assignment to be part of the calculation of the final score, or if I want it to be, if I don't want it to be there. So if it's practice, I click this button. If it's summative, I use this thing. I have instructions. That's what students will see. One could argue I should put the instructions up here, but whatever. Random sampling. I have the ability to make a pool of questions and that every student will get a random collection of those pools. So in other words, if I put 25 questions into this assignment, I can tell the students, okay, I have to change the randomization. So some logic is inconsistent off here, but I can say pick 3 at random for every student. I use this for pre-labs. So the goal of pre-labs is to make sure that students have done some reading before they come into the laboratory work. So I have 25 simple questions that just says you've done some reading, and every student has a different combination of that because I don't have, 24 to the third power combinations or total number of students. So they all have different combinations of these things. It's meant in order to facilitate, again, more individualized work. That's different from algorithmic, which has a single question that varies, although I can mix the two and say even if the same question is shown up for different students, they will have different numbers in their pooling, this random sampling. I'm almost done here. I know that the time is getting a little tight here. Notifications. If I select on, Adapt will send an email to the students a certain period of time that the students dictate. Its default is 24 hours before the deadline saying, hey, you have an assignment due. Some assignments are like that. If this were practice assignments, then I don't do that. But for assessment assignments, I want students to be reminded about these things. I can then decide do assign tos for those people who are in campuses that use Canvas. They have similar assign tos. I'm not sure about other LMSs. You can come in and say, well, because I have 2 sections, or I can say everybody, and these are the dates that they are connected to everybody. It's available on this time. That means when it's opened, it's closed at this time, and that's the first closure. But because I accept late, there's a second deadline. That second deadline may be a week later. It may be the end of the term. It's up to me to decide. But of course, after I've submitted my grades for the class, there's no reason to allow people to keep on submitting after that's done. I can decide when I have a roster, I have individual students' names on here, so I can say this student requires accommodations and they have different dates and times that's associated with them. I can decide for different sections of the classes, they have different times because they have different times for meeting labs and lectures and things like that. And then I have auto release options. I mentioned this before, where I can say I want 5 days before the start date, the open date, to release this, or the scores or the solutions or things like that. And I can decide what date I want to be able to do in order to process that. It's entirely up to you. Okay, so we have just a few minutes left. We have 1 of 2 choices. We can either have you guys build an assignment quickly here and go through what I just went through the last 10 to 15 minutes, or I spend a few moments and show you how to add questions to an existing assignment. I think you probably want the second, but I'm willing to have you guys work through the first. And I'm willing to go a few minutes over the time, but I understand that your time is no doubt expensive, so I don't want to be wasteful here. How would you guys like to proceed?
I am more interested in the second,
Okay.
but I could be flexible too.
Neil?
Yeah, let's go with the second.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to create this assignment. I did something wrong, and it's because the two due dates are the same time and date, and that makes no sense. And then I've created this assignment. Okay, so this is an empty assignment right here. It's has a red hue, so I need to increase it. I need to open it. I go into it, and now the question that we want, again, I'm reiterating, we have courses, we have assignments, we have questions. We create assignments. It has a range of properties here that I didn't have the time in order to go through here because I was focusing on other things that I encourage you to take a look at, including the graders and the regraders and statistics and other things like that. But the question that we want to address at this last moment is how to put questions into our assignments. So again, we have 300,000 questions to work from. How do we go about doing that? And there are several ways in order to do it, but I prefer one because I think it's the most convenient and easier to understand. That's the one I'll be talking about here. All I need to put a question into my assignment is just the ID number of that question. That's it. So if I know an ID number of a question, I can embed it. And how do I go about doing that? Well, I have two buttons on here. I can create a new question, or I can add an existing question. If I add an existing question, it will come up with these things. One is me going through a question bank and searching through and seeing all the different things that are there in different parse size. That can be very distracting because you don't need to do that, because all you need is to be able to paste an ID number in here and it works. So in this case here, you can do something relatively simple. If you parse through someone's course and you find a question that you like fibrous joints. Here is an open-ended question. I want something that looks a little bit prettier. These are all open-ended questions. Why? Okay, whatever. Here we have them. So it's an H5P question. All I need is to copy this thing, which I copied in my course. I can, of course, highlight this and do a Control C if I want. And I just come in here and I paste it, and that's it. Now I'll go back, and it's already added. Easy peasy. Now this is convenient for me because the way I can handle two different tabs, one tab that I'm parsing and say, I like this question, I like this question, I like this question, and one tab that I just paste the numbers in and it's ready to rock. But I have the ability in order to go through and do a search through questions if I decide to want to go about doing that. So that's one mechanism to find questions. The other mechanism is to go through other people's courses and say, oh, this other individual has a course that has a section, this assignment, and this assignment is something what I like. I want to see what questions that instructor has used. Oh, I like this question, I like this question, I like this question, and move forward with that. I call that browsing, finding by browsing, but you can do finding by searching. So you can come in and say, I want to do a search dealing with calculus. And it will do a search looking for calculus in the title. It doesn't do it on the meta tags. So many calculus questions don't have the word calculus in the title. These ones do, the fundamental theorem of calculus. I can come in and copy this, and I can go back to my my course, and I don't want to make it, and just add it here, and we're ready to rock. That right there is convenient and it's easy to understand. But you can parse through the search in order to say, I want to search here, I want to search there, I want to be able to identify all these things. We'll have meta tags. We're going to start using AI in order to facilitate classifications to various learning objectives or various frameworks and other things, which will make life a lot easier in order to go about doing. You can do searches that you only want to use auto-graded. You don't want to use any open-ended grading because that's your preference. Or if you prefer one type of technology or the other, various searches and such in order to be able to do that. I encourage you to parse through that. Again, you have 300,000 questions to go through in a wide range of different courses. Many of them you're not going to care about because the person who cares about the calculus course is probably not so interested in the articulated joint questions that are out there. But it's a reasonable infrastructure in order to keep track of these questions in a centralized manner so we're able to run with it. Now, there are lots of other things that I didn't have time in order to discuss, including the statistics uh, and how you can use that, or the learning analytics, not the statistics. So it's more than just here's some descriptive components. It's here's individual students and their performances. Here's an intervention to find out if certain students look like that they have some trouble and they need to be have some intervention involved in it. Overrides that you can use for submissions. We didn't talk about how you can create courses. Have a good day, Sarah. And we didn't talk about how to create questions, which takes a whole lot of time, or templates. But we will be talking about learning trees tomorrow, and I'm going to try to fill in a little bit of that gap in there. But normally this is a full day workshop, not just a few hours. So I bit off a little bit more than I can chew.